Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Rafae Iqbal, and in today's show we'll be deliberating on Pakistan and the IMF relationship. And of course, in that regard, we'll be talking how Pakistan needs to shore up tax revenue as stated by the Finance Minister Mohammad Aurangzeb. If we go to the backdrop of this statement, the budget was presented last month by the Finance Minister Mohammad Aurangzeb, and the bill was also passed and it is now into effect. The Finance Minister has time and time again reiterated for tax reforms, and so did Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif in that regard. And in the budget that was presented, we saw the tax reforms also, and of course the different measures to shore up the tax reserves, increase tax revenue, and of course increase the country's tax net overall. In that regards, we know that the tax burden on the salaried class, but the measures have also been taken to increase the tax net and include retailers, the importers, and of course exporters as well, and all the industrialists. And in regards to the IMF bailout package, the Finance Minister had earlier stated that Islamabad seeks a $6 to $8 billion package from the IMF, which will be an extended fund facility, which will be much needed to increase the country's exports and of course for financial stability overall of the country. There have been many positive economic indicators that we've been seeing, such as the Pakistan Stock Exchange reaching an all-time high, and the Finance Minister also talked about that, saying that how the Pakistan Stock Exchange, the 100 index, is the best performing in the Asian markets recently. And the Finance Minister also said that the extended fund facility, the loan that will be attained from the IMF, should be utilized in a productive manner so that it can help Pakistan in getting out of the debt cycle. And of course, in that regard, he says the agriculture sector, the IT and export sector of the country needs to be reformed and brought to its full potential. And he also talked about the Federal Board of Revenue's digitization to ensure transparency in the tax system. So in the first segment, we'll be discussing all the different topics. In the second segment, we'll be talking about the Doha 3 talks and how there's international efforts to call on Afghanistan and the Afghan Taliban government to ensure the human rights are upheld in the country. And of course, they focus on women's right to education and employment and inclusivity. And it also focused on the terror threat emanating from Afghanistan, where banned militant outfits have been using the Afghan soil to carry out their nefarious designs in the region. We'll be discussing all the different aspects relating to both the topics. In the studios, we've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi. Along with that, we've been joined by geopolitical analyst Raja Faisal, and on Skype we have been joined by Dr. Mahmood, Khalid, who is an economist. Thank you all for your time and being part of the conversation. I'll start off our conversation from Dr. Mahmood Khalid regards to the statement made by the Finance Minister, as Pakistan needs to shore up the tax revenue. In regards to that, how do you think the government could balance the need to increase the tax revenue in line with the burden on the salaried class that is already prevailing, and the small businesses as well?
Thank you, first of all, for having me on the show. And especially let me talk on this very sensitive topic from the economic perspective. Everybody would like to have higher taxes because this is something which the fiscal balances the requirement of the government of Pakistan as well as the economy as well. But having said that, I'm not very sure that in the present budget, the way they have come out with 40% increase in the revenue is going to be possibly collected the way they have thought about it. In our perspective, the economy is basically sum total of the transactions which are happening. And for the revenue to be collected, the first thing is that the economic transactions need to happen. We are very happy with identification of sectors which were not paying their due share. So this is something which we should go ahead with. The retail sector is one in that, and there are wholesale and distributors which should have been actually giving up their due shares of the tax responsibility. And the important thing is that this time the focus is that it is going to be end-to-end digitization, which is going to be the primary vehicle through which they are going to collect higher taxes. So this is something good. But at the same time, if you look across the finance bill, there are many such instances in which the rates of the existing tax base has been increased. You have rightly mentioned the salaried class has been put to task in terms of paying more taxes. But let me assure you that it's not just the salaried class. On the other side of the table, the common individuals, which are businessmen, which are non-salaried, but they are filing the returns, are even taxed more. So from that perspective, this is something which is really worrisome, because often the businesses feel that if you don't allow us to do the transactions, if you don't allow us to do the work and only increase the taxes, because we all know that the other side of the equation, in which the people are actually looking for the higher quality service delivery, is not happening. If federal government is going to retain close to 10 trillion of the total revenues, out of which 9 trillion is going to go for interest repayments. So almost all of the rest of the expenditures, including the development spending, is going to be coming from the borrowed money. So we have to really think through in terms of how do we want to achieve that milestone. So what we think at the PIDE is that we have to take the 360-degree angle view before going into more taxation of the existing bases. We should think about improving the complexity or the design of the taxation system, in which the confidence could be developed, certainty could be developed. I'll give you a quick example. Special economic zones by act were supposed to be tax-free places in which the businesses could come, invest, and they would be exempt from the income tax for a number of years. I think that was 5. And that was taken back a couple of years ago. And this year they have again brought it back. So that kind of an uncertainty in the policy, whichever side it is, this is something which we really need to improve if we want to move ahead with this milestone to be achieved.
Dr. Zab, I'm glad that you actually mentioned special economic zones as well, because as I understand, even if you don't give any tax breaks, because the government of Pakistan does not own the land there, especially in Gwadar, the speculation alone will increase the prices so much that it will be difficult. Do you think that there is any way to control that? Secondly, because you are talking about tax structure, do you think that there are think tanks who have actually put in an effort to design such a thing? Because we keep on hearing about importance of restructuring everything, but we haven't seen much work done in this regard.
I totally agree with you, because what happens is that we come out with very good out of the box solutions, but since we have not created that roadmap which actually leads them to normalization, you must have heard lots of hues and cries from the exporters, in which now, because they are put to normal tax regime where they're not going to be zero rated, rather they have to actually pay 1% of their total receipts as the minimum tax, and that is going to be adjustable. They are all saying that this is something bad. Now, what the thing is that if had there been a policy of exemptions of zero rating, which should culminate at a particular point in time, where everybody should think that if there is an income, then he or she should be paying tax at an equity basis along the other individuals which are paying. Now, from the same perspective, if you look deep into the SEZs, SEZs normally across the world have concessions. They are supposed to be doing business. If it is, let's say, export reprocessing zone, then it is something kind of a territory in which the businesses come, they do, and they take away their goods to outside Pakistan. So practically there is going to be no charge of domestic taxes. Totally agreed. But for those businesses which are going to do the domestic commerce, because the specialized economic zones is not just for exports, they are also bringing in good stuff, imports and products to Pakistani markets as well. So they should be subject to normal tax regime. So what happens across the globe is that there is an exemption which gradually dies down. Instead of having a cliff where a business basically is enjoying a tax amnesty for the 5 years, and then suddenly they have to pay the taxes. This is something which is detrimental for a business, and they are likely going to lobby for it. They're likely going to think about some ways and means where they can pressurize that this should not happen. So had there been a policy of gradually taking away those exemptions, then they can be brought into normal tax.
Right. And I'm glad that you're talking about that, but I wanted to particularly for you to actually comment on how land is distributed in those areas which are going to be SEZs. In Gwadar particularly, what astounded me was that the authority has demarcated the area where they are going to allow, industries to be established, but the government doesn't have that land. So if I am an owner, I can ask any price. If you are going to give somebody any concession, but then the cost of land becomes impossible, how exactly are you going to manage that?
I totally agree with you. And this is something for the SEZs which has been brought to the policy fronts, that simply declaring a particular zone as the SEZ is not going to help. You have to think about the land titles, you have to think about the infrastructure, you have to think about how the energy is going to be supplied. Even you have to think about how the workers' residents and their day-to-day requirements are going to be fulfilled. So it's a complete package which has to be given in order to really declare it as an SEZ. So I totally agree with your point that if there is a problem in terms of owning that particular piece of land and there is no property right in terms of having authority which actually takes over the piece of land and then converts it into plots or providing it to the businesses. So practically that's never going to happen. So this is something which we have to really think through. So in order to have a policy or a program which actually delivers, it has to be well thought with all possible risks and the scenarios which might happen. And accordingly, there should be policies in which the government intervention should be minimal, but if it is essential, they have to actually take out that step.
Yeah, Dr. Mahmood, if we go through obviously statements coming from finance minister, he has said that there is a need to create capacity to repay the loans. Of course, we are heading towards a fresh, IMF package of $6 to $8 billion. We have been talking about it since long. And in that context, of course, we know that when we talk about increasing the capacity, that capacity would be obviously generated by SIFC from different sectors, and at the same time when we talk about the growth of our economy, we need to of course increase the volume of our economy, and that can only be done so through the positive growth, and positive growth in a manner that can obviously create a sort of record when it comes to Pakistan's growth, domestic growth, and that can be a positive plus for of course helping in repaying all of the loans. So are we prepared, and are we on the route in which of course we can claim that our economic volume would be as such that can be of course help us to repay all of the loans?
Just to add a caveat to this question, sir, let me also ask you, how is that possible with 20% interest rate, and also when the government is not going to spare anybody of taxes?
Well, actually, I'll take up the second comment which Pitafi has just made. If you look at the budget, honestly, there is no room. I'm basically a bit suspicious even for the development allocations which they have made close to 1.4 trillion, because that's almost 3 times higher as compared to the last year's budget which they have actually spent. So simply saying is not going to help. So we have to really think in terms of whether there is going to be capacity in terms of having higher revenue which is spared for repayments, at the same time doing some homework in terms of creating the necessary savings. If you read the minister's statement, he is very ambitious that we should look into the state-owned enterprises, and we have been talking about the SOE's reforms here in all possible dimensions. But at the same time, the NFC also needs to be thought through, because at present, the provinces are taking money for spending. They are not partnering in terms of the liabilities. Even if you look into their operations, they are not that much growth oriented. So we are talking about economic growth. We are thinking about how we can create our repayment capacities. But at the same time, the provinces are actually not coordinating with the Federation in terms of achieving that particular goal, and all the hard work is left for the federal government. Now, if FBR goes on in terms of being pressed to collect the taxes and try to meet that tax to GDP target on their own, then I'm sorry, it's not going to be met. Because quickly, if you take the example that if you take out the agricultural sector from the economy and then take the tax to GDP ratio, then it is close to 20%. So that means that the provinces which were supposed to collect from that 22% of the economic activity as a tax collection are not actually fulfilling their need. So simply putting all the swords with the FBR and asking them to fight the war of of sustainability and in terms of making the repaints, this is not going to help. Now, the main thing which we have to actually really remember is that the external debts are not going to be met by even our domestic revenue collection. That is only going to be met if we have enough surplus capacity, both for our exports as well as coming from our remittances. And the last thing which has been mentioned, the investment which should come through the SIFC platforms by improving our regulatory regime, and overall business policy uncertainty should be taken out from the system. If that doesn't happen, then it's really going to be very tough for Pakistan to be able to repay its external commitments. Remember that the domestic, yeah.
Dr. Mahmood, I fully agree with you. Reason being, during the weekend, I actually met with one of the, a businesswoman from South Africa. During the weekend, I met her, and she openly told me about since almost 3 years she's been doing business in Pakistan. She actually does business in the cosmetics, and she of course exports cosmetic materials like facelifting and Botox and all of these things. And she says that the material she gets it from Pakistan, the quality is so good that it's getting famous in African countries. She obviously highlighted one aspect of it which was worrying, and that was related to, she said that the biggest hurdle she is facing is the customs. It takes almost 2 months to her to actually fix everything around that export, and by then the product, of course, of course it consumes her more resources in terms of monetary resources. So she says that if the government eases the mechanism of the customs, then that would be a huge help. Of course, it would help more businessmen from African countries to come to Pakistan and going for Pakistani products, and of course exporting products from here to their own countries.
By the way, what were you doing at a beauty shop?
No, I wasn't doing anything at a beauty shop, but no, we actually met at one of the seminars, and then later on we had a coffee together.
You don't have to clarify, it was just a joke. Go ahead.
No, but not everyone is smart like you, so maybe we have to often go to such places.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're very right, because you know that this is something which the businesses are looking for, that they need some kind of a mechanism which actually takes out their problems which are not value adding. So as she has mentioned, that they were basically put to wait for a number of days for no reason, because that was not adding any value to the product. So this is something which we have to think about. And it's not just about the physical clearance of the goods, it's about documentation, it's about thinking that so many regulatory authorities needs to be touched upon, the certificates need to be issued. And the good thing is that the government is looking forward in terms of creating another authority, unfortunately, but for the purpose of single window based provisioning of all these licensing and other facilitations. So what they've proposed is that on the example of the Pakistan single window of the customs, there should be an authority which should be dealing with all kinds of licensing. But again, the problem is that why do we need so many licenses? I'll give you a quick example. I was on a retreat in Bourbon with the Pakistan Tax Bar Association, where one of the participants informed us that they wanted to do business in latex in Malaysia. They landed on the airport. They met with a single person in their Ministry of Commerce in which they requested that they wanted to invest in a particular city. Now that officer of the that particular department just called the mayor of that particular city and informed that person that there is going to be an investor coming from Pakistan and he wants to invest in your area. Now that mayor actually went to the airport to receive the Pakistani investor and took him to that particular specialized economic zone where they can actually set up their investment facility for the rubber manufacturing and others. Now that kind of an ease, that kind of an ownership needs to be given. And I really believe that this is high time that if the federal government can really ask the lower tiers of the government, going up to the districts, going up to the cities, that they should actually come up and start owning these. This is not just a federal issue. This is something for which the whole of the government, including the provincial governments, including the local governments, that they have to come out and start owning investment, start owning these businesses, start owning these foreign money which is coming into Pakistan by providing them ease, by providing them security, and by providing them certainty in policy. If you only ask the federal government to resolve all that problem while sitting in the center, then this is not going to help in any case.
Definitely. Farrukh Pitafi, I'd also like to hear your views since we're talking about.
No, you don't.
I actually do, since we're talking about how we need to create a business-friendly environment, and there's obviously hurdles that the investors face. The SIFC has launched its business facilitation centers on the same model as in China's Shenzhen. Do you think the SIFC could further play a role in the custom hurdles and the other issues that the investors face in the country, especially when they talk about exporting?
Right. I think that at this moment we'll have to come back to taxation, because that is going to be an IMF, that is going to be the bigger question. But regarding SIFC and how it has been created, I want to actually narrate here a very sad episode that I experienced, right? Back in 2005, when the earthquake hit Pakistan, at that moment I was with a international NGO related to media development, right? And because so many people were badly affected, what we had decided was, it was called Internews, by the way. So we decided that we are going to actually convince the government and PEMRA to relocate many of the radio stations in those areas. The idea was that at least with the radio station, and then you hand out radio sets, what happens is that very easily you can communicate and tell people where to find medical help and where to find medicine, food. So what we did the first part very quickly. We got the licenses, and then those radio stations were established there within no time. Small, enterprises, but they were there. But then the second part came. When we had to import the radio sets, do you know what happened? Customs stopped the shipment, and it kept on languishing there for 2 years. Until then, the entire thing was over. So this is how bureaucratic this country can be. My humble summation is that when you are talking about all these things, you have to find a way to ensure that these red tape don't actually stop people from investing or benefiting. So of course, in that context, what SIFC has done, there is only one circular spiral staircase in Pakistan's bureaucracy, and there are 3 floors: local, provincial, and federal. And there you have complications because there are so many rooms. So what SIFC has done is replace that spiral staircase, which can be blocked at times, with many elevators that can immediately go from one story to the other.
Right.
So in that context, of course, it has helped a lot. But the only thing is that these issues are secondary. First of all, whenever you are going to actually ask somebody to invest in Pakistan, you'll have to ask them, tell them that you're going to make a lot of money, right? Why would anybody come here without making money? And if you have this kind of regimes, you have to keep on taxing, and taxation includes children's stationery and whatnot, then it becomes almost impossible for people. Of course, there was a question about tax on graves. You know that it was a serious question and it was raised in the parliament by a government MP. With that kind of issue, if I'm going to die and then my family has to decide whether they can pay the tax or not, then better start cremating people like me, right? Because I don't have that kind of resources. These are the issues that need to be discussed with the fund. The problem is somehow it seems that the fund is hell-bent on punishing the middle class rather than providing solutions. Otherwise, they could have very easily asked, okay, cut expenditure from here. SOEs, you keep on talking about privatizing SOEs and you have been doing it for 40 years. Talking about that has become an industry in itself. Why don't you do something about it? Do it quickly, right? Instead, what they have asked is tax everything. And because we have complied, it is going to really hurt. And even my fear is that there was a time when neoliberalism essentially fostered middle class. Right. And that was the whole idea of free economies which function and which enable a generation of a middle class. But this time, whatever has happened in Sri Lanka, whatever is happening in Egypt, whatever is happening in Bangladesh and elsewhere, and now Pakistan, I think somehow IMF has decided they don't want middle class, they want the rich and they want the poor.
Right.
And more poor, the better, because then it is going to be a different kind of story. So my humble submission is, with unimaginative approach to all these problems, you can ask for investment, but whether investor will come, that is a different story.
Definitely a very important point raised. Dr. Mahmood, what would you say, as the government has talked about the extended fund facility time and time again, how, in your opinion, do you think it can utilize it productively for economic growth and also debt sustainability, as it has talked about?
Well, the good thing, if you analyze qualitatively the finance minister's speech, what he said is that let this IMF program be our own program. So what we are really thinking about is that hopefully this time, whatever policies are going to be agreed upon, although as Pitafi has rightly mentioned that the budget is something which is really worrisome, but let's say that if they are able to come out with a homegrown kind of an agenda, although unfortunately that homegrown agenda is also being written by donors from UK, but if that the homegrown agenda somehow works through and we are able to really call it as our own, then maybe this is something which would really help. Otherwise, prima facie, what appears is that our approach towards IMF is, for the time being, again a kind of a bailout request in which we are looking for an X amount of resources from the IMF, along with credibility establishment based on the IMF suggestions, and eventually we are able to attract foreign investment, we are able to go to the international capital markets for additional resources, and at the same time the donors such as the ADB, such as the World Bank and the others are also going to provide us some relief through their stopped programs to be started again. But in order to do that, we have to have a kind of a homegrown and mutually acceptable kind of a framework in which everybody, as I've just mentioned, that just forget about the federal government. It has to be a whole of the Pakistan approach in which every Pakistani has to actually own a particular economic agenda. Even after debate, there can be different point of views. There can be two pathways leading to a common goal. But at least it should be something which is going to stay for long period. But if we are going to adopt a policy which is very short term again, let's say we are good in terms of selling some of our public assets and we are unable to turn around some of them, then this is not going to solve our problem. And as Pitafi has mentioned, even if you read the newspapers back in 1950s, then you would find the same kind of problems as what we are facing right now. So that analogy has to change, and that can only come if we have an agenda which is mutually acceptable.
Dr. Mahmood, I'm glad that you mentioned 1950s also, because Musharraf Zaidi, our mutual friend, actually wrote a column recently in which he has actually reflected on our negotiations with IMF in 1990s when Moin Qureshi became the Prime Minister. So that actually sent me back to reading his transcripts of his interviews and his speeches. Do you know, when Pakistan was negotiating that package to the tune of $1 billion, what were we calling it? Homegrown package.
But again, if you go into the details, it was not that much kind of a homegrown, because simply calling it a spade is not going to actually make it a spade. We have to think about where actually the changes are going to be made. Is it really something on which we have debated? It's a bipartisan kind of a thing which is going to be encrypted in our code books. Like if you go across the border, the M Commission of the India was the same, where they have actually decided that this is going to be our holy book for the economic prosperity and growth. Even if you look at the Chinese model and others which have actually made progress, that was something which was long term, which was mutually acceptable and gradually laid down the foundations. Growth does not happen overnight. We cannot say that this budget or this even government is going to lead to a growth trajectory which would be good enough. It can actually start moving towards that. We can roll over that. But until unless we have a plan for it, which is really worked out and which is really acceptable to all, which includes the leakages, which includes the efficiency of the government, which includes the inclusion for taxation purposes, which improves the digitization framework, and above all, the certainty in the policy is there.
Right, Dr. Mahmood Khalid, a point very well made. Of course, national consensus on economic revival, a very important need of the hour.
Sorry to cut you, will you allow me just to make a request to Dr. Mahmood?
Yes,
Dr.
please
Mahmood, you keep on actually talking about macro policy. What we are looking at this moment as citizens is something else. For example, one message might have sunk in by now, that if you are working class man in this country, aapki khair nahi. So you are going to be troubled in the coming days as well. It is the rich that get concessions on their cars, their luxury cars and all. So why not spend your incredible resources and your mind on writing a book, How to Become Very Rich, so that the government of Pakistan can not tax you?
That's also a good solution. But you know that for writing a book, you need peace of mind. If you one day, if you wake up and look at your finance bill, you know that as a teacher, you were given.
If it benefits me, I will personally guarantee peace of mind to you. I'll come and stand at your gate and actually guard you.
Dr. Mahmood, we're waiting for that.
Yeah, we're definitely waiting for that book to come out. And with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Mahmood Khalid, Economist. Thank you for your time and being part of the conversation. Of course, the points that you raised up are very important and the government should pay heed to. Regards our next segment, we'll be talking about the Doha 3 meetings. Of course, the international community has been persuading Afghanistan to take up the matter of human rights. Of course, when we talk about the human rights, it's the women's right to education and employment, the inclusivity issues, and of course, the militant outfits using Afghan soil to carry out their nefarious designs in the region. Farrukh, Pitafi, Raja Faisal, sorry, I'd like to start from you first.
You forgot my name. Mixed up my name with yours. Okay.
Yeah, pardon me. Raja Faisal, from the Doha Accord till the Doha 3 meetings, where the Afghan Taliban were making commitments to the world community, to now the world community asking the Afghan side to come up to their commitments. How would you sum it up?
Yeah, Rafae, if we obviously look at the very recent meetings they had, obviously with the different countries of the world in Doha once more. Of course, we know that previously Doha Accord took place, and in that Doha Accord, the 3 premier things they talked about, it was of course the inclusiveness of the regime they will be having, and of course all of the other political stakeholders would be involved in it, which we saw that they are not. And then secondly, their land would never be used against any of the other countries, including Pakistan and rest of the neighboring countries, and of course that too is not happening at all. And the third one, of course, it was related to women empowerment and rights of education for women, equal rights of education for women as well. They are not ready to even talk about it, and in that context, of course, they in the very recent meeting as well, they were denying that they are doing anything related to it, and of course they have a clear sort of statement related to it that they will not be talking about that as for now. Reason being, Rafae, I actually came across a couple of key people of Taliban regime last year, and while talking to them, this was the key issue I actually highlighted. Right. And I actually said to them why it was important for a healthy society to have female education in that society, because if you educate a daughter, eventually she is going to educate the whole family, the next generation. And I actually highlighted that the other aspects as well, that if your wife is pregnant, who would you be more comfortable with that she gets treated by, a female or a male? Then of course they said a female doctor. Then when they said the female doctor, then I said, if you stop education in your country, how would you how would you be able to get that female doctor in your country? So these sort of examples, I actually highlighted them, and eventually at that time, while talking to me, they said there are issues related to different ulamas within Taliban regime, and majority of the educated class of Taliban who have been studying throughout, I mean in Afghanistan as well, in different universities of Pakistan, they studied, and later on of course they were immigrants in Pakistan, they were refugees, and while they were being having refugee status in Pakistan, they were studying in Pakistan. They had the soft corner for, of course, female education, and they said that we time and again highlight the same issues and the same arguments which you are highlighting in front of us, and of course we highlight that with the hierarchy, the the ulama or muftis, all of them, we highlight these things in front of them, but still they are not coming to terms with it. Reason being, the majority of the support they have on ground, they are not willing to accept any of these things. Reason being, they believe that it is part of their culture to, of course, do not let their females to go to schools and all. Exactly. And at that time, he actually said, because when I said that if you come to terms with it, what kind of ideas you have? Are you going to go for a different schools? Because in Pakistan, even in Pakistan, we have only female schools as well, because if the parents are not okay for their daughters to going to be the co-education, there are schools available in Pakistan. Then they said that we can very smartly use the same schools, in terms that in the morning females can be studying in the same schools, and in the afternoons male can be studying in the same schools. So we talked about these things at that time, but the major problem is within Taliban itself, on ground, their support base, which is massive obviously for them, that would never accept it. Reason being, they are still sticking to the same thoughts related to their own traditions, not sending females to like study and all of that, and it has a lot to do with the kind of society they have in Afghanistan. Definitely. And the kind of family system they have in Afghanistan. And moreover, the muftis and ulamas, they always come up with these kind of decrees that are actually more acceptable to people at large, so that they can get recognition as their religious leader and all of that. Right. So I think somehow Taliban, they are not still ready to talk about it. Reason being, this backlash they want to avoid, which they will face eventually from their own people. To me, I think somewhere down the line they have to adjust it, and they have to, of course, come to terms with it. And unless they talk about it, including Pakistan, whole world must pressurize Taliban regime, because this is something, it is not only about Taliban only, but it is about the whole population of Afghanistan, and especially the half of the population of Afghanistan that is being not allowed to go to school, and that is obviously of females. So to me, I think somewhere down the line they have to come up with a solution to it.
Inshallah, in 100 or 200 years.
Right. With that comment for Pitafi, I'd also like your views, considering how the Afghan Taliban, with their conditions to the talks, being the sole representatives of Afghanistan, and them being rigid when it comes to their culture or their values or norms, and not trying to have any flexibility towards the modern norms or the international norms that are known worldwide. How do you think any breakthrough could be achieved when there's so much, when there's no flexibility from both sides?
And I'm going to talk about that, but which culture are you talking about? Afghan culture. Afghan people used to send their daughters to colleges, universities, ages before Taliban ever came to power. What culture is this that women are not allowed, right? The biggest problem, to be honest, and by the way, I want to actually make a comment, take it in lighter vein. He spent most of his time in India, on Indian channels. He goes and talks to Afghan Taliban. And amazingly, I've done neither of those two things, and I have never actually broken a gamla or actually killed a sparrow. But somehow, some genius in my own country's intelligence community decided to put caveat on my travel document that I am somehow a security challenge. Amazing. But that was in lighter vein. I'm the one who's the bad guy. Right? He's not the bad one. But now about Afghan Taliban. You can wake somebody who's sleeping. If somebody is pretending to sleep, you can't wake them. The biggest problem with any kind of extremist that I had the misfortune to actually interact with, and I've had my fair share of interactions with extremists all over the world. And the biggest problem is that when you try to actually convince them, there comes a time when you think that you're gaining some space, right? But what happens? All of a sudden, a switch flips and they are back to the old self, right? The biggest problem is that this is some kind of industry. I have always believed, and this is my biggest concern. It was my biggest concern when they took over as well, and I will tell you what exactly is that. Afghan Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS Khorasan, ISIS, the actual ISIS, all of them actually gave bad name to Islam. They are there to prove to the world that Muslims actually live in caves. IS, it was initially called ISIL, then it was called ISIS, and eventually it was called Islamic State. Do you get the indication that this is how Islamic states are going to be? Right? So with that kind of a pattern, I don't think there is any correction possible. Now, my biggest problem was back in 1999, Indian channels, Indian newspapers celebrated an American report called Asia 2025. And that report actually showed, because it was for the first time that in a war game report, they showed Pakistan disintegrating. American report, right? DOD's report. And in that, Ashley Tellis and other people of Indian origin also participated. At that time, in that story, there was Afghanistan was under Taliban. So, like it happens with any kind of white nationalist movements all over the world, that somehow they go back to one manual, and that is Turner Diaries, right? Similarly, every Hindutva Bhakt who actually believes in Akhand Bharat somehow has started believing in Asia 2025. And somehow, just before 2025, when their hardliners are predicting that in 2025 Pakistan is going to become a part of India, at that time 3 or 4 years ago, all of a sudden Afghan Taliban come back to the picture and they take over Afghanistan. So my humble submission, I have to see it with suspicion that there is some kind of incredible conspiracy that is going on. Believe you me, had there been no Indian conspiracy, Pakistan's economy would have been far better. But it is because there is a conspiracy, right? They have actually placed one of their moles as the now DMD of IMF, who was chief economist at that time, right? Because of that, they have created such problems for the entire region. Sri Lanka, Adani Group had a problem with Sri Lanka. Look what happened to Sri Lanka. Bangladesh immediately cooperated because and facilitated Adani. Now, if you don't sell your airports and your seaports to Adani Group through other means, you will see what IMF will do to you. So, because of all that picture, I'm really worried why are Afghan Taliban sitting there.
Well, that's great food for thought. With that, we'll have to conclude today's show. Of course, we talked about Pakistan and IMF relations and the tax scenario in the country, and of course, the much-needed reforms regarding that. We also talked about Afghanistan and the Doha 3 meetings. I'd like to thank both of our panelists, senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and geopolitical analyst Faisal. Thank you both for your time and being part of the conversation. With that, we'll see you same time tomorrow. Till then, take care.